Today is Tuesday, November 1st, 2016, and this is episode 175 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Well, almost always.
Well, except for that one time. That's right.
And we are actually recording in lovely New York City.
That's right.
And we can almost see Central Park from Jerry's hotel room.
Some trees, yeah.
Yeah. Through a little sliver between two buildings. But we're here for the inaugural O'Reilly Security Conference, which is pretty cool so far, and focused on enterprise defense, which is right up our alley for the show. So we came up to hang out and be a part of the show and see some good talks.
Indeed. We last night we hosted the Ignite Talks, which I thought went phenomenally well.
I mean, we're biased because we hosted.
That's true.
No, but it was a great time, and I don't think it got filmed, unfortunately. So I don't think there's any actual record of it. But it was. If you've never done an Ignite talk, by the way, it's really fun. It's basically you submit 20 slides, and you have 5 minutes, and the slides auto advance every 15 seconds. So it can get a little hairy, but it was good times. I think everybody enjoyed, and we also had a little bit of extra time, so we put together something called Slide Karaoke, where Jerry and I, very evilly and maliciously, you might say, went and found a bunch of just random, absurd slides from real presentations out in the world, put them together, and then got 5 volunteers who had basically 5 slides they've never even seen before, and they've got to talk to them like it's their presentation and just figure their way through it. So it was good improv fun.
Yeah, and I have to say, everybody that participated did just a phenomenal job.
Yeah, absolutely. And we met some fans of the show, which was great. We always love that. There's been a number of folks who have come up and said hello and mentioned that they're fans of the show, and for all those that are here who haven't said hello to us, you probably won't hear this before you leave. But in general, never be shy. We're probably as socially awkward or more so than you guys are. So
that's certainly true. Certainly true. So yeah, I think we're gonna talk a little bit about what we've seen so far at the conference, but also we do have a couple of stories to talk about. But before we do that, I do want to remind everyone that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers.
It's true. Poor Jerry's been on the road so much. I had to come to New York City to record a show.
Yeah, well, desperate times, desperate measures, and all that. So anyhow, let's do some quick stories, and then we'll talk about the show.
Okay.
So the first story we have for today comes from bankinfosecurity.com, and the title is "Online Ad Industry Threatened by Security Issues." This is for longtime listeners of the show, I think not a particularly new issue. However, what's changing is potentially some of the regulatory landscape. So the story here is that, as you hopefully are aware, online ads are a very common method of distributing malware and exploiting computers. And there's been just probably too many major incidents to note. I can recall dozens of high-profile sites from NBC.com to the Council on Foreign Relations, and actually, I think CFR wasn't a banner ad, but whatever.
Yeah, I go to that site. I mean, daily, don't you?
Well, think about the people who do.
I mean, when I was single, I kept looking for dating tips for dating women. It never.
All right, so moving on. Anyhow, the point here is that this is a really troubling area, and there's not a lot of protection from the side of the ad networks, right? I think they do to varying degrees, depending on which ad network you're talking about. They do some amount of due diligence to make sure that the ads are cleaned up, but they point out that even Google, who runs arguably one of the more clean ad campaigns, back in 2014, ejected something like almost 500,000 ads for being malicious. So it's a really, like, malicious links, obviously.
Clearly.
You've
been waiting 5 years to make that joke.
Yeah, that's right. So the challenge is that when you go to a website, you really don't have any way to see the provenance of an ad, right? It just shows up, and it only takes once if your system is vulnerable to whatever it's going to try to exploit. And
the tough part is, this is advice we've given people over the years is go to well-known safe sites.
Right.
Don't go to Bob's budget downloader site,
Right.
And this completely subverts that advice. It takes the reputation of the website and uses it against users.
Exactly. And I remember back, decades ago, the advice was, porn sites and where sites were the dangerous parts of the the internet. But now it is the otherwise legitimate sites like NBC.com and many, I don't want to pick on them too much, right? But
no.
It's many otherwise legitimate websites are falling victim to this issue.
And for those who've never looked into it, just very, very quick background. What you have is in essence, portions of the website are sold to ad networks. And the website, if we'll keep picking on NBC.com, they have no idea necessarily what's being shown up in that particular portion of the web page. It's coming from another server off the ad network, and then the bad guys are going to the ad networks, and they're basically buying ads, but what they're doing is they're serving up malicious code in those ads. So the advertisement, in essence, can run things like Flash and Java and other stuff to actually be used to attack visitors to that website. And even though the attack isn't coming from NBC.com, it's a redirect from that web page to the ad network. But it not only hurts the end user, it also hurts that website that was in good faith working with an ad company, an ad network, that the bad guys were able to basically hire out to serve their malware.
Yeah. So the obvious solution is to run ad blockers and things like NoScript and that sort of thing.
But that's, of course, causing its own set of...
But the problem is that kind of breaks one of the fundamental models that the internet has adopted, which is, ad-supported content. And when you take that away, now, NBC.com and others have a hard time making ends meet. Not that we should necessarily feel bad for NBC.com, but there are many other examples of websites which are solely funded by their ads.
Yeah, there's a whole culture war going on right now over this. I mean, I won't dare to get on the internet without an ad blocker these days. But there's now sites out there that says, hey, you're running an ad blocker. And they go everything from guilt-tripping me into whitelisting their webpage to outright not letting me in, like Forbes.com.
Forbes is the notable example.
I'm okay with not browsing that site.
Yeah, I've gotten there too. I mean,
I look at it this way: until you can assure me that the ads you're serving me are not malware, that's your business problem. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to browse your site without some protection.
I wonder. We'll almost certainly never figure this out, right? But I wonder what kind of impact to Forbes that has, right? Are they suffering at all? And is it materializing as a hindrance to their business?
I don't know. I think, like most things, this is probably a niche problem.
Probably.
Probably 10% of whatever. Roughly 10% are security nerds like us who know enough to run an ad blocker.
Right.
Although I have seen some corporate organizations do corporate-wide ad blocking.
Yeah.
which not only saves you in massive bandwidth, but also blocks a whole lot of malware. So that's where I think you might start to see actual impact. But anyway, back to the story itself.
Yeah. So, one of the, I think there's in the article, there's a kind of a tenuous link between some looming regulations, particularly the FTC, which is really starting to clamp down on organizations that are not doing enough to protect their customers. I'm not aware, and the article doesn't mention anything, but I'm not aware of any ad network related actions taken by the FTC. But I have to imagine that's only a matter of time. And, we've talked about in the past that the FTC has a wide and very nebulous set of perceived authorities. And so it does seem like it's only a matter of time. And, I do wonder, they actually mentioned the GDPR, the European Data Protection Directive that's coming up, where potentially if you were to lose the personal data of European citizens, as an organization, you could be sanctioned 4% or fined 4% of your global annual revenue, which for a lot of companies is, probably not existential, but it's certainly gonna hurt. But
you don't want to fine to put a company out of business.
Right. But the problem, I think, is who do you fine? Right? Is it the company? Because it's almost certainly not going to be the ad network that is losing the data.
You should probably find the routing company that passed the packets to you.
The ISP.
Yes, I think. No, not even the ISP. I mean the actual routing manufacturer. Yeah,
Cisco,
like Cisco, Juniper. Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe whoever Vince Cerf. I think he should.
Who makes that? Who makes Cat 5 or Cat 6? The
the IEEE standard?
Yeah.
We could. Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's kind of interesting about this article too is, so the digital ad industry is actually starting to try to clean up their act as well, and they mentioned in this article that the sort of the industry group for this, the Trustworthy Accountability Group, or TAG, because it's catchy. They released their first ever set of guidelines for how ad companies can scan their content to ensure they're not distributing malware. So it's voluntary, but it's the first time we've ever seen the ad industry kind of try to come out with some sort of best practices, which could be, in reaction to, hey, we better regulate ourselves before the government comes in and regulates us, but maybe it'll help.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm personally kind of skeptical.
Yeah, it's an arms race right now. And I think the bad guys are really smart about leveraging the ad networks, and I think they probably still have a bunch of tricks up their sleeves if the ad networks start getting smarter about stopping them. So I don't see this being a safe zone for a long time, unless they went to a very, very dumb static content that couldn't inject any sort of code. I think that's one of the few options they could go with that would truly assure it. But that also reduces their capability, reduces their tracking, their targeting, all the sort of value add that the ad network provides would all go away.
Yeah, and unfortunately, like it or hate it, I think it's becoming relatively well accepted. I'm not going to say proven, right? That video ads are where it's at, and you lose a lot of that capability. So I don't know where it ends. I do think that we're kind of at odds.
HTML5 will fix all of this, no problem.
Clearly, there's not going to be any similar problems in HTML5.
No.
All right, so moving on to our next story, which comes from SecurityWeek.com, and the title here is Shadow Brokers Leaks Servers Allegedly Hacked by NSA. So by way of a bit of background, back I think in August, if I recall, this group called Shadow Brokers mysteriously posted online a diatribe which included what alleged to be a sample of a much larger set of data, and in that sample was a bunch of ODE, right? That impacted equipment from Cisco and Juniper and others, And as it turned out, the exploits were pretty old, right?
Yeah, they were pretty aged, at least for the firmware they're targeted, the firewalls they're going after.
Right.
But they were highly effective
right.
against the versions.
Right. So lots been written and a lot's been said about the equation group and sorry, not the equation group, the shadow broker group and who they might be, and is their bad English really bad, or is it fake bad, or but that's kind of neither here nor there. The new news.
Well, I mean, you're an expert on bad English, so.
Well, that is true. That's very true. The new news here is that the shadow broker group has released a bunch of, I guess it's log data, which purports to be traffic from compromised systems run by the Equation Group, and the Equation Group is commonly thought to be the NSA, the National Security Agency here in the U.S. And so that the concept behind this breach is, if you and some analysts have picked through it and found the actual IP addresses and ports and whatnot. The idea is that this is a listing of likely sources of attacks that were perpetrated by the Equation Group sometime between 2001 and 2010, I guess, is what I read. So it's probably not very timely. Certainly, I would hope that the compromised hosts or alleged compromised hosts in that data set were almost certainly turned over since then. Although maybe they're not if they're DVRs, right?
Yeah, what's interesting too is that the top 10 affected countries does not include the U.S., which somewhat supports the case that this might have been U.S. government nation-state action.
Right.
I mean, it's potentially coincidental and circumstantial, but
yeah. And by the way, I think the important thing to understand is that my read, at least, is that the list of systems is systems that were compromised and used as part of their command and control infrastructure. So not the actual end target of their operation. And it's also interesting because the original pot of data, and I think this one too, is alleged to have come from a system that was compromised by the Equation Group and wasn't properly cleaned up afterwards. So basically, the Equation Group compromised some system out on the internet for whatever reason, because it was placed in a certain network or what have you, and they dropped their kit on it to spread laterally, and it was that kit that whoever the shadow broker group is got a hold of and is now trying to sell, by the way, for the low price of 10,000 Bitcoins. And so, allegedly, there's a lot more, right? There's a lot more.
And just so you know, currently they're up to, out of the 10,000 that they're trying to raise, the current grand total on the board, two Bitcoins.
Only 9,998 Bitcoins to go. Come on, we can do this, people.
They need a telethon, I think.
Dig deep. Dig deep.
So yeah, it's interesting, and we'll see what more comes of it. There's an interesting possibility here. If you do find out your organization is in this list, wow, what a get out of jail free card. Look, boss, it was the NSA. What do you want me to do?
Well, that's a good point. Good point. But I
mean, if you can't get the letter from Kevin Mandia, this is your next best. Save your job.
True. That's true. I think it would be interesting if there were organizations that had had firewall logs kicking around for a long time, to be able to look back and see retrospectively if any of this stuff shows up. But it seems unlikely. If it's 6 years ago, man, I mean, maybe somebody does, but that seems unlikely. It does also make me wonder, let's say something much more recent shows up, right? And what are the I've been thinking about this. Right, what would the reporting obligations be if you saw, for instance, you see evidence that some kind of quote APT had been in your network. You could see, for instance, a ton of interactive traffic, but because of their stealthy operations, you couldn't actually see what they were doing. But put yourself in the shoes of maybe a healthcare provider or a retailer or something like that. What is your because you can't prove
Right.
that they told that that they took it? Would you not disclose it, or it's a?
I think that's a really hard conversation between legal and and the security organization in that circumstance.
Yeah.
It really depends on your vertical. It really depends on your regulatory environment. And
Agreed.
I got to feel there's probably a lot of stuff that doesn't get reported that probably should be.
Yeah. There was a story about that a couple of weeks ago, I think.
Yeah.
So moving on to our next story, which comes from ElPasoInc.com.
Which I got to tell you has some of the best stories.
Totally.
I,
Only second behind Florida. So the title here is EPISD, which is the El Paso Independent School District, offers some answers in data breach. So I think it was last April, the school district suffered a breach where the direct deposit for, I think it was 51 ISD employees was redirected to banks that an attacker controlled, which is totally awesome. $93,000 was stolen in this attack. Now, the IT security manager of the ISD was apparently terminated shortly after this episode for unrelated causes.
completely
Totally
coincidental.
unrelated.
Just another isolated incident.
Yeah.
Right.
He went to spend more time with his family.
He had some health issues.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, but before he left, he indicated that the method of attack was apparently really persistent phishing attacks against ISD employees. And again, allegedly, this phishing campaign was just really, really persistent until they collected user IDs and passwords to be able to log into a system that allowed these attacker or attackers to redirect the direct deposit of these 51 employees. Now, it's not really clear if they had captured the 51 user IDs and passwords, or if they captured one and they used it to, was this some kind of administrative account? However, what they did say was that normally the ISD does not allow employees to change their own direct deposit elections. You actually have to go through the ISD HR department and prove that you're you. And by the way, that was done because they had an internal audit the year before, which apparently showed all sorts of insecure craziness. And so they turned that off.
But Jerry, I can hear our listeners asking,
how did it happen?
if it was turned off.
So a vendor who supported their application applied a patch which changed the setting, which allowed their employees to go back and, you guessed it, change their direct deposit elections.
Nice.
And so kind of in the in the spirit of most of these breaches are a series of unfortunately lined up kind of tragedies. This is just another example where lots of opportunity for it to go right.
Well, you might call it the air chain.
Yes, the error chain. Yes,
which is a commonly used discussion point in other areas, like, for instance, aviation. Most aviation accidents occur because of a chain of errors or mistakes that, if you could have interrupted any one of those, would have prevented whatever the incident or tragedy or plane crashing into the ground situation might have been.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, in security, it seems like there's very few like singular causes. And that makes things difficult.
Are you going to break into song about a singular sensation?
No, I'm not.
Please?
No,
We've had a request.
no.
Oh,
So, the thing that I thought was really interesting, other than the concept, which I hadn't really heard of before. I mean,
which concept?
Of people logging in to
redirecting direct deposit. Yeah.
That was novel. So keep an eye out for that because
how annoying would that be? Right, your paycheck doesn't show up, and like your checks start bouncing, and you call HR and you're like, "Hey, where's my money?" And they're like, "Hey, we sent it to you."
Yeah, and by the way, these are teachers. They're not like the the most highly paid employees ever. So I'm sure it created a hardship for them, and the school district ended up having to remunerate them.
And of course, a year of credit monitoring.
And the credit monitoring, the obligatory credit monitoring.
That apparently fixes everything.
So,
I'm so sorry you lost your arm in that tragic mill accident. Here's a free year of credit monitoring.
Yes. So, I think the other interesting thing for me was the persistence, the apparent persistence of the phishing attack, and I think a lot of this is something that's concerned me for a long time. Right? We often talk about, well, we just have to detect them, right? And if we can detect them, we can stop them, and that's fine until you have someone who just keeps trying, right? And that's
right. Detect them and stop them by what? Creating signature for that particular type of fish?
Right. And I guess my concern is that when I hear a lot of people talk, it seems like there's a lot of focus on just detecting it and then blocking them and declaring victory and moving on. And I really think that's just fraught with peril.
Well,
as this points out,
we're clearly getting our ass kicked by phishing.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I get the intuitive response to say detect it and we can take action. I've seen it many times in my own organizations where if we know that a phishing campaign has come in, and we can detect it or it's been reported, we could go and remove it from people's inboxes before they have the opportunity to click on it. But that's also, again, assuming that there's a commonality and a pattern to these phishing attacks. And when we start getting into really persistent or really focused attacks, that could be very low and slow and very unique.
Right.
And we're still struggling, I think, of finding the right balance between user awareness training, technical controls, and business process changes to limit the impact.
Right.
And here, two-factor authentication would have been a good option, possibly. Some sort of verification, system of, hey, before we change this direct deposit, we're going to email or mail something to your home address with a second authentication something.
Yeah, what's interesting is most companies, most employers, and then most of the payroll firms that provide this outsourced service, when you change your direct deposit elections, you get an email.
Yeah, typically
that confirms. And so I wonder,
and often physical. At least I typically get also a piece of physical mail. Mind you, that's like a week later.
Right. So anyway, and I think typically doesn't take effect right away either. So I don't know what they don't go into any of those circumstances here, but anyway, heads up on the technique. It's kind of a new thing, and we often see copycats, right? So something to be aware of, and also I would say, just because you caught the fisher and blocked them, don't assume that you've won the battle, right? Because they may not be moving on to the next target. They may just change up their the fish a little bit and move to a different source host or what have you, and then try again. So moving on to our last story, which is also about phishing. I thought this one was rather interesting. This comes from Palo Alto Labs blog, and the title is PSA Conference Invite Used as a Lure by Operation Lotus Blossom Actors. So Palo Alto has a Asia Pacific cybersecurity conference coming up, and what they had detected, or I think they were alerted by an astute recipient, that that someone had been, this allegedly Lotus Blossom group, had been sending malicious emails containing Word docs, weaponized Word docs, to security professionals. And it's not clear to me if they were all people who are going to be invited to the conference or attending the conference. That part wasn't clear to me. But anyway, the idea, the thing I thought was pretty interesting is relatively targeted at we've seen similar things like targeted at, let's say, nuclear physicists and, maybe foreign relations people and government officials, but this one's targeted at cybersecurity people.
Right, which you might think is a bit of a tougher target to crack, but
I don't think it is, really.
Maybe not.
I have a feeling, I obviously don't have any metrics to back it up, but I have this feeling that it might not be all that different.
Yeah, you're probably right, sadly. But the emails basically were saying that it was a free invite to the conference.
So maybe it was just kind of scattershot.
Well, still, I mean, it was going after folks, who likely would go, I would imagine. Maybe, I don't know.
True.
But it was a very well crafted email too. It looks pretty solid.
Yeah. Yep. And if you were unfortunate enough to open the Word doc, you got this Trojan called the emissary Trojan, which was previously used in other APT style attacks. So I don't have a lot of information about what its capabilities are, but I would assume it probably does all the normal Trojan type things.
Yeah, and it appears also to be a downloader to download all sorts of other stuff too. So, once it's there, it could do almost anything.
Yeah. So that was the last story. So now let's talk a little bit about our experiences here at the O'Reilly Security Conference.
Yeah, so it's the first time that they've done this. In fact, we're in New York City. They're doing another one, I think, in a week.
New York City.
Try this also. There's another one coming up, I think, in a week in Amsterdam.
That's right.
So we're not going to that one, but it's good. It's truly a defender-focused conference. It's truly meant for kind of the same niche we're in with our podcast. Of not necessarily, people dropping O-days and, being on the sort of the black hat and gray hat side. It's really meant for the blue team folks. And so it kicked off, I guess, really, there was training classes over the weekend, but the first real event was the event we hosted last night, which was the Ignite event, which we already talked about a little bit, which was good times, sponsored by GitHub. So a little shout out to them for that. And then today we went to a bunch of keynotes, which was pretty cool. One of the keynotes that really caught my eye was by one guy whose name is suddenly escaping me. I'll look it up here. He's a well-known writer and speaker, and he gave basically this talk about the emotional price of working in the intelligence agencies, and sort of paralleling that with how things are for a lot of us doing this job every day and how difficult it can be. And how we are burning out a lot of people and how we are absolutely just destroying people emotionally and mentally in this line of work. And I think it's true. I think we are absolutely running our people into the ground in this line of work. And we're treating everything as the most urgent hair-on-fire situation when it's really a long-term marathon. And we're not setting our people up to be able to sustain the level of intensity most larger organizations have.
Right.
They're not staffed for it, and they're not, I really don't think most CISOs care. I think that they're, for whatever reason, culturally, we are just driving so hard in our security organizations that we're really just going to continue to burn people out.
Yeah, indeed. I think
Richard Time is his name, by the way. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, and his keynote was Playing Through the Pain, the impact of secrets and dark knowledge on security and intelligence professionals. Now, go ahead.
Yeah, he was I'll say he was a very energetic and passionate speaker. I thought it was it's probably one of the best talks I've seen in a long time. I do think, he had a lot more material than he had time for, which was very unfortunate. Because I could probably sit there listening to him for another hour. But I think we had 40 minutes with him. I can certainly see in myself and in people I work with a lot of what he was talking about. Now, the context was his experiences again has been much more slanted on the military and intelligence angle, but his proposition was that it really transfers over to the security world, right? Where we have to live with and support the decisions, however possibly onerous, of our organizations, or we have to leave. And it's a similar situation in the intelligence agency, right? And there's very few people who, we can talk about, and this is really important from a defense perspective, right? Because unlike on the offense side, you go to any one of the conferences and you'll hear about the exploits of of pen testers, right? They love to talk about it, and they're incentivized to talk about it. But we can't, on the defense side, we can't talk about that.
Right, we're certainly not supposed to.
And the reason we can't talk about it is because it's company confidential information. We'll get fired for it. And so who can we talk to, right? And so we end up having this this difficult situation, which creates a lot of emotional strain. And I think we all, if any of us that have been in the industry for a long time, have known a number of people who have, unfortunately committed suicide or are addicted to alcohol or drugs or something else, or and then the other one he pointed out was divorce. It's very, very common too.
I know you don't want to bring up my addiction to cat videos. I'm working on it.
Meow.
No, it's true. And you mentioned something too. You and I have to be very careful on this show ourselves. We both have jobs that we're working deeply in security for large organizations, and we can't really talk about any of that. Although some of the topics are perfect for the show, we have an ethical obligation and a legal obligation to not disclose that information if we want to keep our jobs and also just maintain our level of ethics. But there are a lot of times that we have to do things, whether it's in our current roles or previous roles, that we don't make the decision. And what we are asked to do or ordered to do may not be in agreement with our ethical and moral compass.
Exactly.
But you kind of have a choice at that point of either quitting your job or continuing to get a paycheck. And perhaps maybe looking for another job. But I think the longer I've worked in this industry, the longer I've realized that idealistic nature of only doing the right thing is really difficult when you have a family to support and you need that paycheck.
Right.
And it can get really complex. And then you start rationalizing, well, yeah, I'm not doing the perfect thing, but we're moving the ball forward. And then you tell yourself, don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. And it's very common. I mean, we could do a whole show on how do you deal with being told to do something that isn't necessarily what you believe is the right thing to do in an IT security role.
Yeah, and it's a fine line you have to walk because you're, not only is your job on the line, right, but your professional reputation is on the line too, which is really, your next several jobs. And so on the one hand, you don't want to be the person who, who carried out unethical, directions and then have that be found out, because that's going to taint you. And then on the other hand, you don't want to be blabbing about what you see, because even if you're in the right, that you're now tainted as somebody who can't keep things under wraps. And then if you just silently move around every time something is uncomfortable, now you're a job hopper and also unattractive. So it's a very difficult situation for us.
Yeah, we get into this weird feedback loop that we sort of have to end up being morally flexible to move forward.
Right.
Which sucks.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're sort of digressing a little bit from the point of this talk, because this talk is very powerful, and it's not a woe is me talk, but it is a real issue, I think, as our industry progresses, that we've got to figure out a way to balance the emotional demands on our security folks.
Yeah, and I think that his point was we have to take care of ourselves, right? We have to make sure that we take time for ourselves. He pointed out that we should think about things like yoga and exercise and the whole mindfulness bit, whatever you think about that. But the point is, nobody's going to come around and do that for us.
No, in fact, it's usually the opposite. The folks who end up in the CISO roles and the CIO roles are the type A workaholic hard chargers who typically have the expectation of their staff to do the same.
Right.
And if you have this pressure to work more hours and be on call and check your email, and you think that helps make you successful, and it might, but there's always a cost.
Indeed.
And I'm at a point in my life where I try really hard to enforce a work-life balance. I've been very stressed out and burnt out in my career, and I'm trying hard not to do that again. But there are times, that I can feel my coworkers silently judging me if I leave, on time, or whatnot.
Absolutely.
And, I think as well, because of InfoSec, it's a cost center. Businesses are always trying to figure out what's the least amount of staff they can get away with. And so they'll keep the staff to a level where things just barely aren't breaking often.
Right.
And same with startup mentality. It's like being in a startup all the time. When I was at a couple of startups, we never had enough staff. And so everybody was wearing multiple hats, and everything was a crisis, and everything was not enough, money available or people available to get it done. And, that's great if there's an exit with equity on the table. It's a short-term situation, but that's, to me, no way to live a career.
Well, just from a business management philosophy, it's not great either to run your business solely on heroic efforts, because then you're just, one major illness or parental death or,
right.
away from, kind of ruin in the company. And so that's not a great place for an employer to be. I mean, they should. It surprises me that the companies don't want to have a more sustainable view of this, and I guess it's because maybe they just.
I don't think they realize it. I mean, we are the epitome of white collar worker. We sit at the computer all day. I don't think it's internalized emotionally like other jobs would be that would have stress and fatigue and emotional wear and tear. And I'm sure we're not unique in this. I know that. I'm not trying to say that we're so downtrodden and so terrible. I just don't think that our industry is old enough for us to really understand this. I mean, when we really look at it, you and I have each been doing this over 20 years. Mm-hmm. There wasn't much of a security industry before about when we started.
Right.
It was very tiny.
That's right.
Right. So most of the original folks getting into security are now hitting middle age.
Yeah.
And it's different. Your priorities start to shift, and your ability to sustain that level of stress and intensity is different at different ages.
Right. And desire to sustain it too.
Right.
So he actually did mention that, which I thought was interesting, that, we, people in our age, I'm past middle age, right? But we're, we as we advance through the years, right, we not only do we have the work problems, which typically only go in one direction, which is more difficult, we also have our health complications and all the aging related things. So it's something that the point was, the net point was, we have to take care of ourselves. Nobody else is going to do it for us. Take care of your coworkers, your colleagues, and why not? No silver bullets, I don't think.
Yeah, and the problem is still going to be there tomorrow.
Right.
Go home.
That's right. So a couple of other talks I went to. One, I don't have the name in front of me, but it was oh boy, I'm trying to remember the name. It was one of the CDNs gave a presentation about their information.
Oh yeah. It was called Incident Command: The Far Side of the Edge.
There you go.
Given by Fastly.
Fastly. Yeah, I was never going to get that out of memory. So that was really pretty cool. They walk through their internal kind of structure and high level view of their processes, which I thought was really interesting. They talked about how they have the concept of an incident commander who has kind of ultimate responsibility, and then they have this security incident response team who's responsible for more of the investigation. So the incident commander is responsible for like the business, so resumption of service, minimizing impact to them and their customers, and this incident response team is responsible for the investigations and whatnot.
Does the commander get to wear a cool hat?
I didn't ask. That would have been a good question.
Maybe a vest.
I'm thinking one of those hats with a little spinning light on top.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Although that might be somewhat distracting.
It could be. But they talked about how they have their incident commanders and their incident response teams actually reporting through different management chains, right? So they intentionally create some tension to keep some balance. Some of the other things I thought were really interesting was they do a periodic review of recent incidents to make sure that the documentation, kind of after the fact documentation is being completed, which tends, especially in the context of incident response, like we just swing from one vine to another and kind of never look back. And then also, they had this concept of tabletop exercises, right? So I've been in a number of companies who have said, we don't need to test our incident response process, right? Because we're constantly responding to incidents. And they had it, and you can kind of see the logic in that, but they took a slightly different approach and said, what we're going to do is we're going to let people be creative, and we're going to have them come up with some crazy scenarios. And then we're going to take that scenario, we're going to give it to each of these incident commanders and say, how would you respond to this? And then get together and walk through, okay, was that a good response? Well, how, what would be the right way to respond to that incident? And so I think it's an interesting thing to kind of let people take a step back and kind of do some free thinking, which is, always useful.
Yeah, I love that sort of stuff if you've got the cycles to do it.
Right.
But I think that's incredible. I mean, figuring out your response to a crisis when you're not in a crisis is always going to give you the best outcome.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say always. 95% of the time will give you the best outcome.
Yeah.
Because typically our decision-making capability in the middle of a stressful situation is poor. While you were there, I went and saw Jesse Irwin give a talk on Speak Security and Enter, making security make sense for non-technical users. Not a technical talk, but a good talk, and really sort of remind us of how to speak to muggles, as it were, but in in a very respectful way too. One takeaway that I had, and I've seen her give a version of this talk before, but one thing it reminded me of that I wanted to point out was, we glorify and spend so much time on really advanced attacks and pocket cases and whatnot, the 10 percentile attacks, that for non-technical folks, a lot of them just get demoralized about security and give up and make it somebody else's problem because they feel there's no win.
Yeah,
because we completely demoralize them, so they don't even bother doing the basic stuff that would be helpful for 90% of attacks. Unique passwords, password managers, patching, AV, because they hear stuff like, "Oh, well, this would have gone right around AV, so AV sucks," and all of our cynical BS that we spew that gets us research points and catchy named vulnerabilities with theme songs and animals and
merchandise stores. Yeah.
That's right.
Yep.
And get us slots to talk at DEF CON. That's the stuff that we have this feedback loop that's rewarding our industry, and it's valuable. I get it. But the problem is when the average user hears that stuff, they just kind of throw up their hands, and some throw up their hands and give up. And that's not the message we need to be sending them.
Right.
So, it's like we're talking about driving at the Indy 500 and the skill set it takes to sustain that level of intensity, when really we're not doing a good job of giving advice of how you drive around, your local freeway.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good point. The other one I thought was interesting was a talk about highly reliable organizations, or HROs, and so.
Yeah, that was interesting, though frustrating at the same time, because it's like that nirvana you want to reach that is really difficult to get to.
Yeah, and so I think that's a good point. So the idea here is that there's a certain class of organizations like fire departments, and I think he talked about nuclear power plants and aircraft carriers as examples of these highly reliable organizations. And he pointed out that there's been some research done to say these organizations and entities have a lot of failure modes, and a lot more failure modes than the quote average organization. And if those failure modes materialize, they actually have more severe consequences than the average organization too. But when they look at the track record of these highly reliable organizations, they actually fail less than the average organization. And the question was, well, why does that happen? And so the talk was about at least in the analysis done by a particular author, some kind of key differentiators between normal organizations and these highly reliable organizations, and things like valuing failure, right? Rather than the typical organization, which he used the example, sometimes you have a manager or a CEO says, we will not accept failure. We will not tolerate failure. And the problem is that, failure is almost inevitable, and all you've done is ensure that people are going to hide it until they can't hide it anymore.
Right. He also brought out, reward people for pointing out problems, reward people for pointing out concerns and risks.
Right.
And it's interesting because, and I actually asked him this question, and his answer was very telling. Any vulnerability management program that I've personally been a part of in my career, the security folks who are finding vulnerabilities, or pen test folks, if they're internal, end up owning the solution as well. They own the remediation problem, typically. And so if that organization points out a problem that can't be solved in short order, they now have this negative feedback loop in the organization of they are on the hook for solving it, and so now it's sort of bad for them to point out something they can't solve.
Right.
And which is absolutely asinine behavior and completely contrary to what it is you want your risk discovery organizations to be doing. At the very least, you want to know what those risks are, and then not hold that team accountable to, well, we can't solve that risk right now. So, but in a very real sense, a lot of organizations are like, well, we'd rather not know about the risk, because if we know about the risk, then we could be held responsible for not solving it if it comes back to bite us. So anyway, I asked him, well, okay, that's great, but how do you get around that problem of if you want to reward folks for finding things, the culture I've typically seen is if you find it, you own it for fixing it if you're in the security organization. And his answer was, well, you need to build this sort of mindset into the entire organization where the entire organization is willing to be, in essence, incredibly inefficient to lower risk. Right? So when he's talking about trying to take this into security, he's talking about the entire organization is focused on risk reduction over business efficiency. Because when you look at the types of organizations he's talking about, they all have a lot of people involved that are very inefficient to keep things safe.
Yeah. Very conservative.
Right. And the problem that you have is that you've got to get buy off the entire organization that this is your focus. I mean, his concept makes sense if the company is built from the ground up with that culture. It's very difficult to do that in a silo in security.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that is I think the challenge that a lot of organizations have is on the one hand, they say that they would like to get to that place. But on the other hand, it's really unreasonable to think that they would, because it means that they're not going to be able to invest in, or as much, either invest at all or as much in a new product or expanding into a new market, because they have to fund this, somewhat ultra conservative behavior. And a lot of, and it follows, by the way, that a lot of the challenges we see are relatively easily solved. It's just that, we, as we talked about, as organizations, we kind of live right on the edge.
Yeah, most of our problems are solvable problems. It's the trade-off issue.
Right.
Do you want to devote the resources, time, energy, and the opportunity cost to solving that problem when you could be doing something else that's actually increasing shareholder value?
Exactly. And then let's see, we heard from Mr. Potter, Mr. Bruce Potter, about risk analysis, which was a pretty good talk.
I just went to that talk to beg for a ShmooCon ticket.
Did it work?
No.
Yeah, well, I think you said that ShmooCon sold out in 4.2 seconds today.
Well, the first
round, right?
600 tickets. Yeah, no. It was a good talk. Though interestingly, I sort of, if you haven't done risk management before and you're trying to come up with some sort of risk framework, it seemed to make sense to me. But you weren't necessarily so keen on it.
No. If you're, it's true. So Bruce's. Bruce is in support of the NIST framework, which I think is...
Wait, the what?
The NIST framework, I'm sorry.
Oh, my... How many times?
He did it again. He did it again.
How many times?
I'm old. Leave me alone. So
you know what? I'm going to get Matlock to do a very special episode about how you pronounce NIST.
NIST. Yeah. What if I see Matlock say it, then that'll be all right.
What about the Golden Girls?
I never got into them.
At your age,
Murder, She Wrote.
At your age, they'd be into you. All right.
Thanks, buddy. So anyway.
Can you tell we're tired?
Yeah.
We've been on go for a while.
Yeah, I've been in New York for a long time. So I think the NIST framework is one thing, right? And I have my own separate issues with the NIST framework, but he brought up the NIST 830 risk assessment model, and the reality is with that model is actually relatively ambiguous. It proposes some methodology to quantify risk. But the problem is, and it's way longer of a discussion than I can do justice to, but I will tell you, if you want to understand the source of my issue with both the framework and with 830, read the book, The Failure of Risk Management by Douglas Hubbard. It's a very approachable book.
Not related to L. Ron Hubbard?
Not really. Well, as far as I know, he could be.
This isn't like the Dianetics for risk management.
I'm not saying. I'm just saying. So anyway, it's a very good book. It's very approachable. It's not.
What's it called again? One more time.
The Failure of Risk Management by Douglas Hubbard.
Now, is it talking about risk management in general, or is it specifically IT risk management?
It is risk management in general, although he does talk about IT risk quite often in the book.
Okay. And have you received any remuneration for suggesting this particular book?
No, not at all.
All right. So this is of your own free will.
That's right.
Okay. Carry on.
That's right. So, and then I think that was all I had. What about you?
I thought Bruce's talk was good. I thought it was pretty solid. If you hadn't done much with, he's a very entertaining speaker. First off,
no doubt about that.
Yeah,
yes.
I always enjoy it. And Heidi was there, so I waved at her, and she's like, "I don't know who you are." I'm like, "Yeah, we've met."
I saw her going for security.
Yeah, she's known by so many people. She's,
right.
She's a couple notches above us in terms of InfoSec, celebrity status. But anyway, I thought it was good. I mean, especially if you're trying to get your arms around a situation. He's talking about basically figuring out threat models, figuring out risk models, figuring out likelihood, figuring out your assets, and then trying to stack rank them to some level of priority so you know what to start working on, so you're not trying to eat the elephant from all directions at once. So it makes sense at an intuitive level to try to get your hands around a really difficult moving target of where do you start if you're coming into an organization, especially let's say you're standing up a CISO organization for the first time. I think it makes some sense to try to understand the threat models and the threat actors and the risks involved with the organization and figure out where to start. Well,
it's unquestionable that we need to do a better job of assessing risk, right? And that wasn't my beef, and I think anything.
Where is the beef, Jerry?
Under the pickle.
Okay, thank you. For our young listeners, hit YouTube.
That's right. Anyway, I think with that we're going to go and go find some dinner before the purge starts tonight.
We had one other talk, which was using open source tools to do like malware analysis.
Oh yes, that's right.
Which was pretty interesting. I mean, it was great if you've not done that kind of work before. It's kind of a list of tools, how to safely analyze a website, how to safely analyze a piece of malware. It's more sort of like an intro level. Getting into it.
There were some unique things which I think for any malware analyst. Probably nothing revolutionary, but things looking for unusual. I would say not necessarily unusual, but non-traditional things, like looking for the name of mutexes that are used by malware to make sure that doesn't keep reinstalling itself,
right?
And using that to look up in VirusTotal rather than the hash, because the hash can change. Very often, however, certain other attributes of the malware, like the mutex, may not, and not by the way, not all malware will have a mutex, so your mileage may vary. But the point was, there's a lot of stuff you can do using a lot of publicly available websites like URL Void and MX Tools and VirusTotal and others to help identify, what are you dealing with in terms of malware? Is it targeted at you? Is it opportunistic? What's it trying to do? Is it new, or are other people seeing it? And so it was a good basic talk, I thought.
Yeah, and we've got a whole nother day tomorrow of talks, so hopefully some other good ones, and then you finally get to go home.
I'm so looking forward to going home. I miss my family and my doggies and my kitties.
And your cats. Don't forget the kitties.
Yeah, my kitties. That's right.
I need the videos. I need them. I need the videos. So, real quick wrap up. Really enjoying the conference. Really happy to be here. Glad that O'Reilly invited us up to participate and run the Ignite track. And now we get to hang out and see all sorts of cool people.
That's right. And thanks again to O'Reilly, and not that they sponsored us, by the way.
No,
But-
I mean,
but
let's be
they,
very
they
fair.
invited us.
They
here.
invited us, and they gave us passes.
Right.
Right, but that's we
Full
try to be
full
very
disclosure.
we try to be very transparent on that.
So anyway, we will talk again probably next week. Hopefully we'll be back on a regular schedule. In the meantime, if you want to find links to the stories we talked about today, I will include them in our show notes. If you want to follow the show on Twitter, it's at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Kellett on Twitter at Lurg. You can follow me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And by the way, I assume that at some point we'll have to find some new thing because Twitter seems to be having an impending implosion. But
We'll have to get a young intern to tell us what all the hip kids are doing today.
yeah, like I guess Snapchat and Instagram will be our where you'll find us soon. So
I'm waiting for Snapgram.
Snapgram, great. Anyway,
I mean, these things have a half-life of 5 years now?
that's right. That's right. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll talk again next time.
Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.